On the review show tonight, the cultural impact of the world's wealthiest game on the world's poorest continent. And with me to kick all this about, the South African-born novelist Gillian Slovo, journalist Gary Young, whose new book is about identity, the dramatist kwei-armah, who's written plays about Africa and football, and the writer and football fan John O'Farrell. The hosting of the tournament in South Africa may have had a massive effect on how the continent's perceived, but does the huge popularity of football across Africa also help to explain how Africans see themselves? This is the subject of a new book, Africa United, by the writer and journalist Steve Bloomfield, and a new film, Football Fables, made by Baff Akoto. Here's their take on why football has become such an intrinsic part of African culture.
One of the most important things about football in Africa is the fact that, you know, everyone plays it, whether it's in a slum in Nairobi or a refugee camp in Congo or in a park in Johannesburg. It truly is the universal game. Football plays a very large role in the way that Africa is seen as a continent by the rest of the world. You think of famous Africans and you think of mainly politicians and footballs. It's Mandelas and Mugabes and it's Eto'os and Essiens.
Yeah.
If you look at the recent history of Africa, since colonialism, football was really used to really galvanize a new sense of national identity. Ghana was the first sub-Saharan country to gain independence from European colonialists. And the first president was really all about using football for political ends, as an opiate for the masses. My film takes Ghana as a case study, but I think it's true that what you see in Football Fables and the goings-on and how people strive to achieve their dreams and are inspired by, you know, global figures like Sule Muntari or Didier Drogba, this runs throughout the continent. So I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the benefit and the effect of the World Cup will ripple across all 53 states.
Gary, there's obviously very big issues involved in this whole debate, but it's interesting how both the book and the film seem to imply that the success stories with individuals, almost the cult of footballer celebrity, and that's where people's aspirations are, but there's a systemic failure of kind of infrastructure in teams and leagues and national teams as well. Do you go along with that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a kind of both the book and the film in different ways have this kind of metaphor, I think, about globalisation. It's a kind of illustration of how globalisation works, in which poor countries often invest quite a lot of capital in getting people to a certain stage, and then the West sees the ones that they like and then they take them.
It's kind of human trafficking.
So, well, it is in a way. I mean, you know, the Caribbean has very few nurses. You know, not enough nurses because, you know, they're in America and Britain and elsewhere. And so similarly, you have the best African teams, best African individuals are scooped out, meaning you have lots of single great African players and very few, it's the point that Steve Bloomfield makes in his book, very few great African teams apart from in Egypt. I think the other really interesting thing, particularly in his book, is the way that I think it's Hobsbawm who said an imagined community of millions can seem more real in a team of 11 people, named people, and that a lot of African countries are relatively new. Their borders were imposed by colonisers, so they don't really necessarily fit with ethnic and religious groups. And so football can actually be, in those circumstances, a glue that keeps the place together. You know, Ivory Coast kind of exists more in football than it does in reality.
John, so you think the football does... Do you agree with Gary that it potentially has the power to change, or do you...
Absolutely. I mean, in the book, we saw Drogba, you know, having a major effect on the sort of bringing peace to Ivory Coast, which is incredible, the power of that individual
He insisted
celebrity.
on a game being played in the rebel-held North,
in the rebel
didn't
North, and it was done so, and, you know, that's the first time everyone came together. And that's, you know, for Ivory Coast, this World Cup is a shared national experience, and that's something that, you know, as Gary said, the separate sort of tribes would not normally have had. In the east of Africa, I was very moved by the account of the amputees team, who had
in
found
Sierra Leone and Liberia.
Yeah, and they'd found, was it? Oh, sorry, it was the Western. But they'd found some meaning and identity through football when they'd been rejected by sort of most of their communities as amputees, and suddenly they were, you know, they were heroes. So although it's true that it's awful that they aspire to get out of Africa and they've got this impossible dream, really, of playing in the Premiership, and for Manchester United, always it bloody seems.
Well, Arsenal seem to appear all over.
There's actually, they're wearing Fulham shirts in that Ghana one. I don't know, that must have been John Pansel put them out there. But the great thing about the book is just the playing of the football seemed to be a form of liberation in itself. Those 90 minutes on the pitch made them forget all their troubles, forget the fact they had one leg or the fact they'd lost their parents, and that was very liberating. But
isn't there a danger, even with the amputee leagues, that they're exploited by larger forces? I mean, the relationship between politics and football is endemic in these books. There's a nice point made by one of the Kenyan administrators saying, actually, if I could clean up football in Kenya, I could show people I could clean up politics. But the two are inextricably linked, aren't they?
Well, yes. My worry, and not to talk specifically about the book and not to sound like a stuck record, but again, the juxtaposition between the kind of negative Africa and football as the only redeeming force, and really, I found slightly nauseating, and that's probably too strong a word, but I found I was a bit like, OK, so you're going to give me an African dictator and you're going to give me a football team.
And some exuberant fans.
Some exuberant fans, and he's going to be able to... And I just worry again about this. When will we get out of this kind of characterising Africa in only barbaric terms and using metaphors of either music or football as the way to salvation? I find it slightly boring.
Gillian, is this not... I'm in danger of contradicting everything Kwame said, but isn't football one of the success stories, to a certain extent, of Africa and Pan-African culture?
I don't know whether it's one of the success stories. I mean, I think football is a game that can be played with very little money. And it also, I think, offers to kids in Africa the hope, which I think is, we know is not going to happen, is that they can be unbelievably rich. Because these footballers that they are watching, I mean, I think, it was very poignant moments where instead of watching the local team, they're actually watching Sky, they're watching Man United, they're watching our league in preference, is that what they're aspiring to actually is what the West seems to offer people, which is individuals can make it. If you really want it, you can do it. And I don't think that's true. And I think that the film about the football fable was very poignant, because there is a young kid who's obviously pretty good, but you kind of know he's never going to make it, and he is living on this hope that this is what's going to make his life okay, and it's only going to make his life okay. Yes, he'll send money back to his parents, but it's not about something that Africa really does have, which is a sense of community and a sense that actually people together can somehow change the world.
Well, you mentioned the spectre of the Premiership and of English football culture and British football culture in general, and sadly that's where we're now going to move on to. We leave Africa now.